Good morning. There we go. Yeah. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the first roundtable in the series of space-focused discussions today at the Paris Peace Forum. Please fill in and grab a seat if anyone wishes to. There are a couple of here at the table as well. So good morning. My name is Ian Christensen. I'm the Director of Private Sector Programs at an organization known as the Secure World Foundation. Secure World is a US-based nonprofit that focuses on cooperative discussions around space sustainability. So very pleased to be here today with a great group of esteemed speakers, both on this roundtable and throughout the day. And space sustainability is a core area of discussion. So as this is the first of the space-focused roundtables here at this year's forum, I want to set the stage a little bit. So as of this morning, there are approximately 9,100 active satellites in Earth's orbit, according to the US Space Track database. That number is almost double the count of what that would have been 2 years ago today, and nearly 8 times what it would have been 10 years ago. So it's a very rapid growth in the number of objects that we're operating as humanity in space. But in addition to those satellites, those active payloads, there are about 36,500. Do we have any napkins or paper towels here? All right. So again, about 36,500 space debris objects larger than 10 centimeters, about 1 million space debris objects in the 1 centimeter to 10 centimeter size range, and an estimated 130 million objects in the 1 millimeter to 1 centimeter range. All of these objects can cause lethal or significant damage to satellites. This changing and more operationally complex space domain means that we collectively, industry, government, civil society, need to think more carefully about the way that we operate in space and govern those activities. Most of the regulatory frameworks we have related to space activities were originally developed in the context of a much less complex operating domain. Agencies and industry groups are in the process of updating and refining these frameworks, but frankly, industry and innovation moves faster than those processes are able to achieve. A key aspect of space sustainability is the reality that the actions of one actor in the space domain can affect the ability of others to operate safely and sustainably. As the private sector space activity becomes more prevalent, the pace of activity and the introduction of new services and applications, such as large constellations, such as in-orbit servicing, such as commercial space situational awareness capabilities, challenge the existing efficacy and effect of existing regulation. But fortunately, these activities also in themselves provide some opportunities to bring solutions, in particular in on-orbit servicing and in commercial SSA. Governments have a legal obligation to regulate and to update regulatory practice and to protect the public interests of their citizens. Space operators have a business imperative and a commercial imperative to operate safely to execute those business plans, but they also have an obligation or an imperative to constantly innovate and deploy new services. So these sorts of trends are interacting and pushing more attention on the need to think about sustainability and to think about governance. So here, in this roundtable is to present the outcomes of an ongoing Paris Peace Forum Net Zero Space Debris Working Group on governing in-orbit and on-orbit activities, a path towards space traffic coordination. So we're going to talk through how this changing environment is taking place and the role of these different services and commercial initiatives and regulatory initiatives, governance initiatives, in addressing those. I'll let each of the panelists sort of introduce themselves in the course of their introductory remarks. I think it's a little more efficient, and it's always better if you introduce yourself rather than have somebody read a bio. So I want to start with the space traffic coordination and space situational awareness aspect of this situation. So with this increasing population of objects, how do we track those? How do we manage conjunctions, possible collisions between them, and how do we keep awareness of what's happening in the operational domain? And I want to start with a commercial perspective. So Anirudh Sharma is the co-founder and CEO of Digantar, and I'll let you tell us a little bit about what Digantar does and how you view the need for improved space traffic coordination.
Thanks, Ian, for the introduction. Before I introduce my company and what we do, I would like to emphasize the incident of 2009 Iridium and Cosmos. The reason the collision happened was mainly because the SSA systems failed to detect the close proximity. The main reason to that was we didn't have effective systems or the entire SSA systems in place to be able to track and account for maneuvers. So one of the things that I learned during starting of this company is that in 2009, when this collision happened, before the collision, the probability of the collision was 1 in 1 trillion. And Iridium 33 did a station keeping maneuver, which was not accounted and omitted from the threat assessment systems. Because of that, the post maneuver probability was around, if it was accounted, was around 1 in 1,000. But again, it collided and created a lot of debris. So at Digantra, what we do is we emphasize on building accurate catalog of what happens in space, not just from one system, but focus on the entire value chain of space domain awareness, from collecting data from multiple sources, be it telescopes, ground-based, be it telescopes, radars. We specialize in space-based systems. So we launch laser-based systems to track objects in space, and we track object below 10 centimeter in size up to 1 centimeter, which is legal but not trackable. So at Digantra, we focus on the entire value chain of SSA systems, from tracking a system, collecting data from multiple places like any other existing navigation platform does on Earth, collect data from the users. So we do the same thing, and we build a system where we can create a data fusion engine, process all the data, and create a metrics to provide truth versus the data that we propagate while we generate CDMs or provide maneuver design support. So we work both on hardware and software, and we've currently launched 2 satellites which is focused on space weather, and we're launching third one for laser-based space object detection using CubeSat and tracking objects less than 10 centimeter in size.
Thank you, Anirudh. So now I want to turn to one of our public sector colleagues, Pascal, with the EU SST organization. Can you tell us a little bit about the work the EU is doing to improve space traffic coordination?
Thank you very much, Jan. And good morning, everyone. So this is first a tremendous pleasure to be here, to reconnect with colleagues and friends, and to contribute also to the Paris Peace Forum, as ever, every year. So you described it very well, the current situation in orbit. And right now, indeed, we all acknowledge today the growing complexity of our space operations with the multiplication of small satellites, but also the proliferation of large constellations. This is where we are. And I would like to share with you from our operational statistics in USST that right now we have 60% of risky conjunction in LEO, which involve an active spacecraft, and 51% of those risky conjunction with a satellite from a large constellation, while 2 years ago, we had 95% of risky conjunction with a space debris. So the situation has completely changed. It's a change of paradigm. So this is why in this very fast changing space environment today, there are 2 topics. The question of space situational awareness capabilities, which is of utmost importance. And this is the right timing for all of us to massively invest in those space surveillance and tracking capabilities to detect and catalog all space objects very accurately in all orbit regimes, because we need to know where all those stuff up there are. And in addition, we don't have the choice. Space is at risk, and so we absolutely need to coordinate the space traffic as a service. And this is what we do exactly in Europe. And I'm going to say a few words on our journey in Europe with the USST. We started 8 years ago. We have already 7 years of operations behind us. And since the 1st January 2023, we opened the collision avoidance service as a public service to all spacecraft operators worldwide. And our objective is to ensure a minimum level of space safety and sustainability. This is very important. And today we have 55 different satellite operators which have access to this service, and some of them are in the room. So we also rely on an important network of space surveillance and tracking sensors. But because we have a lack of autonomy, in particular in LEO, in Europe, member states are right now upgrading at national level their SSA sensors. And in particular, we have 4 main countries, France, Germany, Spain, and Italy, the 4 founding partners of the USST. And right now, those countries are the ones who invest and a lot of budget, several hundred million euros and much more, in those sensors with Grav and Grav-NG, new generation, Gestra in Germany, FlyEye in Italy, and S3TSR radar in Spain. So all those assets will, in the next year, hopefully be operational, fully operational, and we're going to have, hopefully, a very good situation in terms of autonomy in LEO. But in addition to that, we also acknowledge from a public perspective the extraordinary and unprecedented dynamism of the private sector, and we absolutely need to take advantage of this trend and rely as much as possible also on commercial data. And you may have seen a month ago, we published for the first time in the USST an open call dedicated to acquisition of operational commercial SSA data. And in January, we will publish another call for the development of commercial SSA sensors for a total cost of project of 67 million euros. So it's going to be an important effort, and 45% of the cost will be covered by us, by USST. The idea is that the sensors, those commercial sensors, will continue to be owned and operated by the industry. So I think it's the role really of the governments to shape the policy, to define the strategic objectives, and I think here we need to shape the SSA data market with a clear segmentation between the civil market and the military market. The requirements are different. The military actors need a maximum data at very high frequency on a small number of space objects of interest, on when there's, for instance, some on specific satellites which have some proximity operations. But for the civil sector, it's different. What we need is a few data on a maximum number of space objects, because we have also plenty of space debris. So this segment of the market is very important, and the public sector needs to really well separate and segment the market between those two markets to provide additional opportunities for the commercial industry. To conclude, I think now we are entering in a new era. It's an era of information exchange on space objects and information between the different operational SSA systems in the world. This is also an era where we need to improve coordination, communication, cooperation between us. And this is important to continue this conversation between international partners. And our first partners in the USST are the United States. And we have, of course, this very good conversation with the Office of Space Commerce. And so this conversation should continue very much. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you, Pascal. I think you've outlined nicely some of the different roles that the public sector occupies in cooperation with the private sector. I want to turn now to Rose Crocier, who is with the U.S. Department of Commerce. Pascal just mentioned that the Department of Commerce has a role as well in SSA, so just want to give you a chance to introduce that.
Thank you very much, and Pascal, thank you so much for essentially outlining both our nation's interests in managing commercial space in general, or all of space objects in general. Just a note, Department of Commerce maybe seems out of sync in some ways, but let me explain. Most satellites currently today are civilian and commercial satellites, and the U.S. has decided to shift the responsibility for space situational awareness and space traffic management from the Department of Defense to Department of Commerce to reflect that new reality and really continuing reality. It's only going to increase over time. So we're currently in the process of establishing TRACS, which stands for the Traffic Management System for Space, which is our core system that is going to be rooted with government, but plans to be interactive and modular with commercial capabilities. So we are also following a similar track in leveraging both national assets and cooperation, but then also in the dynamic and creative forces that are found in the commercial community to really, as rapidly as possible, improve our capability and also our ability to share information to maintain a safe space environment. If anyone is interested actually in details on tracks, please go to the Office of Space Commerce. Just Google Office of Space Commerce. And there we do periodically post video updates and other information about how the system is developing and calls for input. Also, we plan to have it initially operational at the end of 2024, and then we'll have like spiral updates regularly to provide more robust service over time. Okay.
Thank you, Rose. So this is a roundtable. I want to now move and give the broader audience a chance to engage, and I'm going to begin that with a question and just put that to the floor. And if anyone in particular from our other speakers, but from the audience in general, would like to answer, just please raise your hand or placard. So we've heard about two public sector systems, one being developed by Europe, one being developed by the US, and we've heard about private sector capabilities to contribute to SSA. Something that I am curious about as a non-technical person is multiple systems are good, multiple data sources are good, but how do we ensure continuity and interoperability between these different systems so that different answers that result can be understood and compared? So if anyone wants to take it on, Audrey.
Thanks, Ian, and good morning, everyone. So I'm Audrey Schaefer. I'm the Vice President of Strategy and Policy at Slingshot Aerospace, which is a U.S. space situational awareness company. But I actually have only been in the private sector for a few months now. I spent like 15 years working in space policy in the U.S. government. And I'm really glad that Anirudh brought up the 2009 Iridium Cosmos collision, because in fact, it wasn't my first job in government. It was my second, being in the Defense Department when that happened. And so over the course of my career, I have watched this evolution that we've talked about, from really there being no one who did space traffic coordination or SSA sharing, to the DoD standing up its first capability, to then, and that took quite a long time and had been operating for a long time, to then transitioning now to the Department of Commerce. Now you have EUSST, and now you have all these commercial sector providers. And so I watched that evolution over time. And, I think it's great that we have all these different sources of data and all these different capabilities in both the public and private sector. But to your point, Ian, now we have sort of multiple sources of truth, although I hesitate to use the word truth because you'll never know exactly what truth is. And that's sort of irrelevant. But the point is, you have all these data sources that you need to fuse and you need to compare. And, technically speaking, the fusion part isn't, I don't actually think, the hard part. One of the things that my company does is really excellent data fusion from multiple different sources, curating the data, throwing out sort of the outliers, and coming up with sort of a reasonable, the truthiest truth you can get of what the situation is. But the only reason that works is because everyone uses standard data formats, and because we have the technical interfaces, like the APIs, to enable that data integration. And so, when I look at this world where we have sort of a federated approach to space traffic coordination, which I think, frankly, is where we will be. I don't think we're going to have some singular, UN space traffic management entity. The most imperative thing we should be doing to facilitate that world is, number one, codifying those standards. Because right now, they're sort of accepted, but they're really not adopted formally. And number two is making sure that we have the technical interfaces to allow for seamless data to pass between these different systems. Because I think then, as one of my technical colleagues said to me yesterday, then it's just math. And the math we can do. Thank you.
Thank you, Audrey. I'm reminded of a line in a textbook that has always stood with me from my days studying chemistry, and it said, "And then calculus happens," right? So it was trust the math once you have the process to get it done. So anybody else that would like to pick up or react to that question? Paul.
Well, I just want to ask, you can do the math if you have the data. So this is a data poor environment. This is why there's so much uncertainty. It's so difficult. Like the Iridium Cosmos, that wasn't even the most likely collision at the time. So my question is, how do we optimize the tasking of limited observation assets?
So I would turn back to our providers, SSA providers, and maybe give both Pascal and Anirudh a chance to speak to that. Yeah.
I think I agree with you. I used to say that SSA data is the new oil. This is what we need today. We are lacking data. Probably at the end of this decade, or we're going to be flooded by plenty of SSA data because of the investment of the nations and the emergence of the private sector investing very much on those commercial SSA capabilities. So, but right now we are at the beginning and we have a lack of SSA data of good quality. What we do in Europe is, this is unique in our dual governance model. We share military, commercial, and civil data, SSA data, of any types, laser, optical measurements, radar. It could be in the future SBSS. We hope to have SBSS data or passive RF data. Any kind of data are welcome, and we merge all those data together. But right now, we need those data very much. And of course, then we have a specific software that we call COPLA, which it's a planification of tasking requests to optimize the tasking request of all the sensors available in the commercial industry or in the member states. So right now, I think data is the new oil, and this is why I advocate a lot, in particular in Europe, to much more investment in the domain, because we need to have those capabilities to be autonomous and understand what's going on up there.
So I would like to add from the technical perspective on, a term that's very much loosely used in the SSA sector is data fusion. So you have several sensors today tracking objects in space, be it, like I said, radars, telescopes, space-based sensors, passive RF, and there is no true data fusion happening while you use any of these sensors, because the outputs of these sensors are very different, and there is no single way for you to merge all of this data and say that here is an object. And that's a problem that we've already seen and are working on when we use two different catalog. Currently, when we process data in our systems, we work with the US catalog and also the Russian catalog. So the Russian catalog doesn't even follow the naming convention that the US does. So that's where you see there are huge problems to, calculate where an object is and accurately predict a position. So what we rather do is basically, have a standard. One of the standards that we use to understand true data is International Laser Ranging Stations. So we use that to estimate the error margins with the data that we track with our systems, and then compare which sensor would be the best to track a particular object. Is it a radar that's tracking a particular object better, or a space-based system? So currently, data is a huge problem, and analytics is something that can be done. Math can be done, but generating accurate data is where the problem lies, and we need to, work like other sectors too, like aviation, maritime, where you have a unified standard to track objects and process that and build a catalog. So building a catalog with multiple data points of a same object is very important for us to solve the problem for space domain awareness.
Thank you. So that comes back to the point that Audrey raised about codifying standards, so we have them, but making sure that they're implemented and standardized, right? But the standards are in place. So we'll have maybe a chance towards the end to come back to some of these discussions, but I want to move on now to the second portion of our topic set today. So developing more sustainable space operations practices and governance will require multiple elements, including space situational awareness, what we've talked about, but also improving space debris mitigation, fielding active debris removal services, and leveraging in-orbit capabilities, and including enhancing regulation as needed. So I want to turn now to a broader discussion of some of these other elements. And I want to start with Tanya Masson-Zwan, who is an assistant professor at the Department of Air and Space Law. Did I get that right, Tanya? At Leiden University. So given the complexity we were just talking about, can you share some views on how the space governance framework can be updated how do various industry best practices initiatives, voluntary guidelines fit in with legal and regulatory frameworks and any experience from other domains that we can leverage?
Yeah, I'll try. Thank you, Ian. And it's good to be here. And about 3 years ago, I had the pleasure of moderating a session that launched the Net Zero Space Declaration of the Paris Peace Forum. And so it's really rewarding to be again back here and to see the journey that we have been undertaking with each other and really making progress in this field. It takes time, but things are happening. And just maybe to set the frame, we do, of course, have that international framework with the Outer Space Treaty and with a number of non-legally binding guidelines, so a system of hard law and soft law on the other hand, which are not detailed enough, which do not address all the questions that have to be addressed. But of course, we do have the system where states are obliged to exercise, to carry out, to have international responsibility for national activities, where they have to authorize and supervise, where we have a system of national legislation emerging, which is addressing also issues of sustainability and debris mitigation in most of them. We have also an article that says that states should consult with each other in case of harmful interference, Article 9 of the Outer Space Treaty. It was interesting that you mentioned the Iridium-Cosmos collision. There was also another instance of the Chinese space station which was disturbed according to its measurements or standards by Starlink satellites. And what I found interesting is that they used another article of the Outer Space Treaty, namely Article 5, which is about astronauts being envoys of mankind and the obligation to inform the United Nations Secretary General in case of phenomena that are observed. And it was quite interesting why they used that article. Probably because that allowed them to give a notification to the UN, and so the statement is in the UN database of documents and so on, rather than using Article 9, which does provide for a mechanism for states to consult with each other if there is a risk of harmful interference. To my knowledge, that article has never been used, and and of course it could be that that has been used but has not been reported. But I think it is a mechanism that is there and that could probably be useful. But then we need to implement that system into other rules, and reference has been made to various initiatives, and a few recent ones I want to mention that are all these bottom-up initiatives that I found really interesting that are happening. And we have in the past had, of course, Space Data Association, the Space Safety Coalition, with which many of the people around the table have been involved. The Space Sustainability Rating, which Emmanuel may maybe say something about. But we also recently had King Charles, who launched the Astra Carta after having launched the Terra Carta, after, of course, the Magna Carta, and that was
Just like 600 years.
yeah, exactly.
1,000 years,
Yeah,
whatever.
yeah, exactly. You have to be ambitious, right? But which was interesting also in I think the sense of looking not only at the space environment but also at the Earth environment. And at the same time, there was another initiative that was launched, the ESSI, the Earth Space Sustainability Initiative, which looks very much also at incentives and at the role of insurance and investment companies. Because I do think that you can have regulations, of course you can have obligations, but you can also make things better by having incentives. And I think that we should not forget about that. Being a lawyer, of course, I want rules, but you can also do things with economic or financial incentives. But having then all these bottom-up initiatives, it may be time now to try to move towards some global standardization of these or implementation of these initiatives, because are they all compatible? And I think here the Paris Peace Forum working groups on net zero space can play a role in really doing a thorough analysis of all these initiatives and in what way they align or perhaps diverge. And there are other areas in international law where a bottom-up system in the end resulted in in an international law system like in the maritime field. I heard you were saying, or somebody was saying, it's not likely that we have an STM organization. Of course, we have the International Civil Aviation Organization, and so we should remain ambitious. We have organizations that work well, like the International Telecommunication Union, which does acknowledge the role of private entities. I think that's really essential, and that's what's missing in the UN COPUOS system, or ICANN for standards for internet, which are interesting models that we should look at. We have, of course, also important developments at the regional level. The EU is very ambitious in its plans for an EU space law at the moment, issued a joint communication on space traffic management, is also talking about a space label, maybe comparable to the SSR. I don't know, is it different, is it the same? And of course the EU explicitly says that their initiatives are to be seen as a step towards global coordination. In the end, that is what we should strive for. And perhaps to end with a message of hope. You know, I've been saying many years, I'm not too optimistic about any new treaty because states are not willing to compromise their sovereignty and their national powers. But last June, a new treaty was adopted for the biodiversity, protection of the biodiversity of areas beyond national jurisdiction and the law of the sea, the High Seas Treaty. That was quite a surprise. Everybody was saying, oh, wow, a new treaty. And of course, we're not there yet. It needs, I think, 60 ratifications. And only then, 6 months after that 60th ratifications, it will enter into force. But the main theme of that treaty was also environmental protection. It foresees the dedication, for instance, of marine protected areas. And we have that also, that concern for outer space. I think everybody now is convinced that we have to do something. We talk about the dark and quiet skies, about radio frequency, silent zones on the moon, and all these things. So maybe we should strive for the higher aim and not forget that as our aim. I'll leave it to that. Thanks.
Thank you, Tanya. So some examples of a couple of things there. So how bottom-up processes can feed into larger processes, and then maybe a counterpoint that there to the earlier discussion that there is a pathway towards international coordination of these things. Again, I think standards plays a big role there. As I understand, both ICANN and ICAO standards are important in how those organizations function. So I want to now turn again back to the private sector and to one of our companies here at the table that is involved in in-space logistics, Maxine Amon, who is with ExoTrail, VP for Public Affairs and ESG there. Maxine, what is the role of an in-space logistics company like yours in managing this more complex environment that we have?
Thank you, Ian. Good morning, everyone. I would like first to thank the Paris Peace Forum for hosting such important debates and for the invitation. So ExoTrail is a space logistics company. So all we do, from hardware to software or services, is about improving in-space mobility. As such, we think we have a very unique position, and we think also that there might be a paradigm shift ahead. This new paradigm would be induced by the advent of a high maneuverability and high mobility era in the satellite world. So what is it? In the addition to the non-maneuverable debris, which we are speaking about today, more and more highly maneuverable satellites whose orbits are marked by a lower predictability index will be added. And this adds difficulty to calculate conjunctions in an already congested area. As a space logistics company, this is not a good environment to evolve in. This is why ExoTrail pushed in this very proactive group a statement. Together, and we hope with other in-orbit services providers, we pledge to commit flight plans to our local authorities with the aim to lower the uncertainty on 2 levels. First, we want to grant further information on a voluntary basis to the legacy SSA coordinators. Instead of calculating the conjunction based on a point basis, we want to provide them the full set of points so that the calculations of our possible conjunctions with other objects are better predictable. But it's not enough. we need international cooperation, a lot has been said this morning, and efficient sharing of this civil SSA data. We hope that this small stimulus could also contribute to steer international cooperation in this regard. And we know for a fact that space is hard, but in fact, space governance might even be harder. Thanks.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that last point is something probably nearly everyone in this room can easily agree to. I don't think we need a large debate on that, but yeah, again, that's why we're here, right, is to discuss solutions to that. So as before, we're going to move towards a more roundtable discussion. I do want to bring Emmanuel into the conversation at this point. So it seems to me one of the things here, Emmanuel, that we're dealing with is how do we balance technology and the trends that technology brings with how to adapt and update regulation in light of that technology. So a question I'm interested in from your perspective as the executive director at the EPFL Space Center is, what is the role of performance versus specification in regulation? How specific do we get, and how do we balance different technology trends there?
Thank you very much for this good question, because it's true that it's a real challenge also for regulators to understand what is the status of technology development, and then what are the implications when you need to design laws in order to foster technology development but not hinder competitiveness either. And a very good example is when you look at the 25 years rule, for example, for space debris removal, that actually, when it was designed, the rule, it was also because of technical constraints and also the possibility, I think it was 20 years ago, of the capabilities of spacecraft to be removed based on the level of fuel that you have left in the tanks of the satellites. Nowadays, we see that actually the capabilities have increased, and even though we see also on one hand that 25 years old is not viable for the space environment, it's also very easily achievable for a spacecraft now to deorbit within 5 years or 1 year after their end of life, because the technology have changed and the propulsion system have changed. And also you're able also to implement propulsion systems also on smaller spacecraft, like on CubeSats. Now you have also technologies that are coming. The technology development also in space is increasing very fast, and this is why also you need to be able to anticipate it, and so to design also regulations that are also compatible with this fast, I would say, environment. And this is why when you mention performance versus technical, I would tend more to say you need to put in those type of laws performance that are not linked to specific technologies, because they might be in 2 to 5 years already outdated. And I think this is really clear also, especially, for example, when you talk about SSA, and our two colleagues mentioned also the data fusion, and this is an area which is also going very fast. The computing capabilities are increasing drastically. The amount of data that will be available also will change. Also, the analysis of past data that we can do is also changing very fast. So that's why it's very challenging also to go to that point. And this is why also one of the reasons that the space sustainability rating was created, because the community, and this will answer also what Tanya was mentioning, that those bottom-up approach, because you see that the community, there is a need also to have those standards, those regulations, but it's not compatible with the time frame of laws development, like either at the national level or international level. And that's why those bottom-up approach are also very important in order to do this dialogue. And I would say also it's very important to have a good discussion also between the technical fields within the space community, but also with other communities. SSA is a good example, because you have also the implication with computing, with data, with cybersecurity, which are other communities and that needs to understand each other's. I'm a space expert, but I'm also learning about cybersecurity and other aspects, and it's difficult, but also then to discuss also with the policy makers, and it means that international dialogue is important, but also within each region that every, I would say, technical and policy makers also exchange together. And the forum is a good place also for that. So thank you very much.
Thank you. So I think a number of interesting points have been raised throughout the discussion here. going to give a chance to the assembled audience to raise your viewpoints or perspectives here in just one moment, but I want to follow up on one point or an issue that Maxime raised. So this idea of flight plans, right? So Tanya talked about ICAO, and flight plans are a thing that the aviation industry certainly uses widely. You've suggested this as an approach to handling some of the more complex operations that we're now looking at in the space domain. So I'm going to open that up idea to the forum to discuss solutions. I'm going to open that idea up to some of our other speakers here, in particular the SSA providers. So that kind of non-static maneuver-based plan that Maxime is discussing, is that something that you all are designing your capabilities to handle as we move forward? I'm interested both in the private and the public providers on that.
Sure, I mean, absolutely. I mean, from our perspective, the more data that we have, the better. Of course, it produces a better product for us as a private company, but then it also produces a better result for spaceflight safety. So absolutely. I mean, and if you'll permit me for just a moment also to respond to something Tanya said earlier, and just this whole question of coordination and cooperation at the international level on space traffic coordination. You know, there's several elements of this, space traffic coordination. You have the data, right, which there are multiple sources, and that's a good thing. You have the analysis of taking the data and making some sense out of it. You have the rules of what should be done if you sort of have a situation, and then you have enforcement. And as you proceed along that path, you know, the international coordination will become more and more difficult. And so to your question, Ian, about flight plans and maneuver sharing and whatnot, I mean, to me that lives sort of at the lower end of the spectrum of the data and the analysis sharing. And those should be the foundation, the baseline for what international coordination looks like and what we should be starting on today, because it's going to be very difficult to reach international consensus about the rules, and I think it's going to be virtually impossible, at least right now, to reach international consensus about the enforcement. And so to Tanya's point, I mean, I do think that there is the possibility for international coordination, but perhaps not all the way at the high end of that spectrum right now.
Thanks for the reality check.
Yes.
Yeah, I fully support the views of Audrey, and you are so experienced with your 15 years of legacy in policy and international negotiations, and we were together in all those negotiations. So I agree, we are not there yet for a top-down approach or regulatory approach at international level. I believe much more in international coordination. We're going to have regional system, SSA system, relying very much on the private sector data. So what I see is really how we can coordinate between those regional systems in development to exchange information. And I weight my words. I say information on space objects and events and not data. Right now, I'm not sure we are ready to share SSA data everywhere in the world. We had a wonderful experiment with the Office of Space Commerce on SSA data sharing. It was an experiment, very interesting. We had a wonderful paper published on that topic, even a press release and an article on breaking defense on that topic. It was presented in EMOS last September. But for routine SSA data exchange, it's going to be complicated for plenty of security reasons, because there are some military data and they share those data in other channels, and also commercial data. We don't want to kill the market. If we share those commercial data everywhere in the world, at the end you have only one customer. So you kill the market, there's no market anymore. So what we would like to do, and this is our role as government, is to shape the market. I talk about the civil and military market. We need to segment and distinguish those two markets, but we also need to make sure that we are not going to share those commercial SSA data that we acquire with all our partners in the world. If we do that, we are going to kill the market. So we're going to share information on space object and event, and I think what we could do in the future, if we succeed in the long term, is to share information on risky conjunction and work together, because we have different analytics, different way of computing and assessing a risk of collision. So we need to make sure that together we agree on the result of our assessment. So this could be a very good way forward.
I think Pascal mentioned a very important challenge that we'll see when we do SSA data sharing or SDA data sharing, because military is involved and we have data sets that we're giving to military organizations as well. And as a commercial SSA company, I see this as a challenge. Often when I work with multiple governments and agencies across the world, so currently we work with most of the Asia Pacific space agencies. And we have data from, like I said, Russia, US, and both the data are not the same. So there are, when you superimpose the data, the positions of the objects are very different, and the latency at which you get these data are also very different. What is important at this point in time is having a transparent information exchange framework. And when we have data sets between commercial and military, I mean, like US does, you can mask the military satellites, but still share the data so that you know where an object is, but you don't have to know what the object is. So that's where I see, that's where I say every time that there is a very thin line of difference between space domain awareness and space situational awareness. Space domain awareness is more of a military term where you have to know everything that's happening in the space domain. Space situational awareness is restricted to the local operator's perspective. You could be a commercial operator wanting to know what's happening around you. If you're in a collision path, that's space situational awareness. So there has to be a transparent framework for us to exchange information between agencies globally. Currently, there are multiple agencies working on this. I think France also has their own catalog. US has a catalog. Russia has a catalog. India is working on developing capabilities for space domain awareness. So we need to have an exchange program between these agencies, at least the elite nations, so as to support space safety.
Well, thank you for all of those comments. I think I would be remiss in my role at Secure World Foundation if I didn't mention the 21 long-term guidelines for the long-term sustainability of space activities, one of which says improve accuracy of orbital data on space objects, enhance the practice and utility of sharing orbital information on space objects. So this is an accepted internationally consensus guideline. The sort of things that we're talking about here at this table move us along in practice and implementation of that guideline, building along that continuum, Audrey, that you're talking about towards the objectives that Tanya's talking about. So Maxime, briefly come to you, and then I want to get to Antonino's questions and open up to the roundtable.
Yeah, it's another question, because all we say is that at some point there are some difficulties in sharing this data. The overall image a nation has in the world. But how do you see testing all flight plans that are shared to you, given the data that you don't want to share? Also, for instance, a military satellite, the position of a military satellite. If I, a commercial actor, share my flight plan to all the other nations with military satellite that don't want to share this data, they can assume at some point, okay, in this area, there a possible conjunction, and please change your data. How do you feel that this flight plan sharing is a way to go forward and to avoid this difficulty?
In our case, we have access to all ephemeris and maneuver plans of those 55 spacecraft operators registered to the Collision Avoidance Service. And some of those satellites are military, but this is managed in a classified environment. So they are safe, they are not at risk. We have access to all of this. So now, if the question is to put all those ephemeris and maneuver plan on a public website, this is not my responsibility. It's the responsibility of each operator to sovereignly decide if they want to make them public. I know that Starlink, for instance, make those ephemeris public. Now the Chinese managed station is new. They publish their ephemeris. So this is very positive for us. But you mentioned the LTS guideline. I would like to jump on another one, which is sharing point of contact. Yes. And very recently, we had a risky conjunction with a Chinese satellite. I must say, right now, we don't have any official point of contact. when there's a risky conjunction. That's for us a concern, because there are plenty of risky conjunction with such objects right now.
Okay. So Rose, yeah, please. Yeah.
So kind of an interesting contrast is the spirit of spacetrack.org. So this has been a catalog published by the U.S. Department of Defense on the measure of decades at this point. And I think we continue to have a policy of sort of an open approach. But kind of the difference is trying to find exactly what is the minimum needed for spaceflight safety. So that's our overriding priority. So we don't want to compete with the commercial sector, again, because we want to make sure there's space for innovation and diversity and inclusion. So that's been a lot of our work this past year to figure out exactly where's that line. And it's really still in development. But I thought that was an important contrast. Thank you.
So we do have about 11 minutes left, and I want to open it up to discussions from the assembled room. So if you could just introduce yourself when you make your remark. Yeah.
Sure. Thank you, Ian. I'm Antonino Salmeri. I'm from the Lunar Policy Platform. Being a good space lawyer, I wanted to come back to Tanya's point about Article 9 of the Aerospace Treaty and the fact that it's never been used, and perhaps wanted to challenge or invite this roundtable and everyone in the audience to think about the fact that maybe this means that we get a chance to shape how it is used, because the article says that we have to conduct appropriate international consultations, and some of the suggestions I heard at this roundtable could be a way to conduct these appropriate international consultations. And one of those that I wanted to bring up, and thank you, Pascal, for starting that conversation, is information sharing. It starts with the information. And again, we have another provision of the Aerospace Treaty, which has been underutilized, Article 11, of which I'm a huge fan. And next year, the legal subcommittee in COPUOS will start discussing ways and means for implementing Article 11 of the Aerospace Treaty. So we are at a key point in time in which we can shape the implementation of two core provisions of international space law in a way that it's never been done before, because now we have a lot of private actors. We have Maxime, we have everyone here at the room, and they will play a key role. So how do we reconcile the responsibility of states under Article 9 and 11 with the fact that a lot of this information is in the hands of private actors? And so all these ways and means could be discussed today, and I would encourage everyone to acknowledge that and own that and suggest that these are ways to start implementing this provision, so that then we can move the two conversations forward together, not just the technical one, but also the one in the international space law, which I think needs some of this energy to be, again, productive.
So thank you for that intervention and suggestion. Anyone, I know we have a few people in the room that are very familiar with the COPUOS system and might want to react to that. Natalia? Yeah.
Thank you very much. Yes, my name is Natalia Archinot. I work with the Swiss Foreign Ministry, and I'm a long-time delegate to COPUOS. So yeah, I'm happy to react on the exchange of information. I think it's very good that the legal subcommittee is tackling those topics, how to implement those articles of the Outer Space Treaty. Back to the LTS guidelines, the exchange or the sharing of a contact point for satellite operators, I remember some discussions within the subcommittee. There is no practical means to actually share this information. And when we think of the implementation of the LTS guidelines, there is quite a lot which actually pertains to international collaboration in the implementation. So deciding among member states, how do we share those information? Is it USA that will make it available to whom, on a website or on demand to the operators or the governments of member states, etc. And this we have not reached this discussion to go into more detail. So we need to make it practicable to find a mechanism, to agree on mechanisms to allow for this sharing to happen in line with the recommendations of the guidelines. Thanks.
Thank you. Definitely agree with with that need, and that maybe is another area where members in this room can help develop some practical proposals. Yeah.
Just to add to that, UN-USA, the UN Office for Outer Space Affairs, actually has a database of contact points for debris mitigation activities. So again, something is happening and maybe we should combine efforts. But it is, I think, about 50 states or so who have communicated their point of contact for debris mitigation issues.
And then, of course, when you're adding in the private sector, it becomes even more complex because those private sector are more likely to register or provide their contacts to their national administration through the licensing process, and then rather than directly to the UN, of course. All right, so we have about 4.5 minutes left of looking around the table, see if anyone else wants to. Paul's move to the no. All right. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. I mean, I don't know if we have a floor mic or not, but yeah.
Yeah, hi, I'm Dick Beneke with the U.S. State Department, also a longtime participant in COPUOS LTS working groups. The one thing I would note and many here know, there's a follow-on working group currently going on, the LTS 2.0 working group, that is specifically looking at issues associated with practical implementation of those 21 guidelines. So, as Pascal pointed out, this issue of, I think it's B1, is exchange points of contact information. We are currently going through the process of how that practically works. And in the specific case with China, that's a very complicated process to go through. It's been less complicated for us historically between U.S. and European, and other Pacific Rim countries. So I think I just wanted to emphasize that that's going on. And obviously another continuing theme that we've seen in COPUOS has been the Article 6 responsibilities that come up, that states do have need to authorize and supervise the activity. So as we have a much more complex and proliferated, I guess, large LEO constellations and those sorts of things, which is part of the business case for the commercial SSA companies to respond to those challenges. We are also sort of trying to take efforts, I know in the United States and I think in Europe, to incorporate those complexities into our positions on the implementation, because we do have those Article 6 responsibilities. Just one other thing while I still have the microphone, I would note in terms of some of the other comments is, I think the United States has realized there is increasing transparency, and that was inevitable. That was reflected in Space Policy Directive 3 and the creation of the track system that Rose talked about. So yes, while military systems are going to worry about protecting and defending, as Pascal said, a very small number of assets against malevolent threats, there's a lot, much more of a complex challenge on spaceflight safety and those sorts of things. And that's where TRACS and EUSST and those federated approaches really offer a lot of promise. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. So looking around, I'm not seeing any further intervention requests, so I think I'll take a minute or two here to kind of wrap up. So first, thank you to all of the speakers that provided an intervention here. I think we raised a number of interesting and thought-provoking positions. I know the Paris Peace Forum Net Zero Space Working Group on this topic has been discussing many of these things, as well as probably some other ones that we did not get to. As I understand it, that group is producing a white paper which should be available somewhat soon here. So look forward to further discussion in there. Just in terms of my role here as a moderator, and a few things that I noted in terms of looking at the forum's interest in developing solutions. I think we proposed a number of possible pathways to explore for solutions here. And so the ones that I heard in particular were further commonality and adoption of standards in SSA data sharing and implementation. So we have some of these standards, but we need to make sure that they're actually implemented and followed, and that will help us be interoperable amongst these various different systems that are under development and operation. We heard discussion of novel ways for increasing information sharing in commercial operations, flight plans, and other things like that. We had a discussion of building practice in the implementation of LTS and bringing those forward into the formal LTS working group, the 2.0 that is going on. So working through our national country delegations to do that. And then there was also a proposal that I thought was rather interesting that the Paris Peace Forum and the Net Zero Space Group could be a good body to kind of look at harmonization and commonality in some of these various different guideline, best practice, bottom-up efforts that are going on. So I don't know if Jerome is in the room, but Leo, if you guys are in the room, maybe put that in the hopper for the future work of the group. So with that, I think I will conclude the session, give a round of applause to everyone who participated, and enjoy the rest of the afternoon.